Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to begin my talk today with a parable that is well known in the medical world. A man is walking along the side of a river when he hears a cry for help. Someone is drowning in the current. So he wades in and he rescues the person, and then he sees another and another and another. He keeps at it, he saves as many as he can, he loses some, and then he starts to become exhausted. And that's when he realizes what he should have realized from the start. He needs to go upstream and find out what's causing all of these people to end up in the river. So he makes his way up, and there he finds a monster throwing people into the water, and that's when his real fight begins. In the scandal of gender medicine, nations all over the world are that man downstream beside the river. Some, like the United States, are struggling to save as many victims as they can through litigation, legislation, and age restrictions aimed at protecting minors. Others, like Canada, with the exception of Alberta, continue to watch as victims get swept away by the powerful current, not just failing to lift a hand to help, but standing on the riverbank, cheering and applauding the carnage. All the actions to protect young people from this medical scandal must be applauded, but let's be clear. These victories are downstream, many are fragile, and quite possibly temporary. Many can be swept away with one change of government and the stroke of a politician's pen, and then the harm begins anew. So it is essential to go upstream in search of the monster. And what do we find when we go upstream? It's not the gang of endocrinologists inducing endocrine disorders into healthy adolescents. It's not even the surgeons amputating healthy breasts or disfiguring genitals, though, to be sure, those are unspeakably monstrous acts. The actual monster is an idea, a false belief. It's the belief that being transgender is innate, healthy, and something to celebrate. That is what is causing all the devastation. Now, as everyone in this room already knows, this idea did not emerge from new research about biology or brain sex. It did not come from any groundbreaking discovery of an inner gender essence called a gender identity that is fixed and immutable. It came from transactivism. The belief was first conceived in the late 1980s when early transactivists gathered behind the scenes and began plotting their assault on reality. These activists didn't like to be labeled mentally ill or sexually deviant. They didn't like the stigma. It didn't suit their political goals. And because they had the power and the political might, they were able to bring this monster to life. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health, an activist group masquerading as a medical association, eagerly jumped on board and launched its re-psychopathologization campaign in 2010, framing transgender identities as natural and healthy, and clearing the way for mass medicalization on demand. The American Psychiatric Association buckled to activist demands next, scrapping gender identity disorder for gender dysphoria. The identity was now healthy, only the distress was labeled disordered. So to be absolutely clear, an entire field of medicine was built on a false belief, a fiction created by a political movement to serve its own agenda. And at no point did anyone stop to question what would be the ramifications of redefining a psychiatric disorder as perfectly healthy and opening up access to medical body modification on demand as a human right. Of course, anyone paying attention could have foreseen the looming catastrophe, and from where we stand in 2025, we know the worst-case scenario has indeed come to pass. So more and more the gender debate is shifting back towards the reality that trans is a mental illness. But actually defining it precisely as a psychiatric disorder is not quite as straightforward as it may seem. A few years ago, I asked psychiatrist Az Hakim whether he thought transgender people were mad, and he gave me a beautiful answer. He said, "They're not mad. They're confused and perhaps autistic, and they've come to the wrong conclusion. The madness lies in how society responds to these individuals, because we don't try to help them. Instead, we collude in this mad way." So this conversation left me wondering, if trans people aren't mad, how can sane people behave in such an insane way? How could anyone who is mentally well be so fixated on obtaining such disfiguring, health-destroying surgeries? And the answer lies in an obscure psychiatric concept called the overvalued idea, or the extreme overvalued belief. Now, I first heard the phrase overvalued idea in that very conversation with Az Hakim, but at the time I confess I didn't understand what he meant, and the significance of it completely passed me by. It was only later, when I encountered the same concept in a 1995 article by the great Dr. Paul McHugh, that I realized this was the missing piece, and suddenly everything fell into place. So it was first described by psychiatrist Karl Wernicke in 1892. He called it an overvalued idea, and it provides an all-important missing link by differentiating pathological, all-consuming beliefs from delusions and obsessions. The definition you see on the screen here is the best one I've come across, taken from the book by Rahman and Abigail, and they called it an extreme overvalued belief. So a delusion is a false belief that is not shared by others, and delusions are often bizarre and idiosyncratic. Think aliens are communicating with me through the radio. Obsessions are intrusive thoughts that the individual finds disturbing and distressing, and often resulting in compulsive behaviors that seek to alleviate that distress. So you can see that trans fits into neither category, but it does fit perfectly into the category of the extreme overvalued belief. These beliefs aren't bizarre and idiosyncratic like a delusion, and they aren't unwanted and distressing like an obsession. They're rigidly held, non-delusional convictions, shared by others in the culture or subculture, relished by the individual, and defended with a passion until they harden into certainty. Crucially, the person doesn't see their conviction as abnormal at all. To the holder, the belief is entirely rational, because so many others around them also share it. Over time, it grows stronger, more resistant to challenge, and ultimately powerful enough to drive action, even violence, in its service. In fact, this little-known psychiatric concept is most often applied in understanding extreme acts of violence, which is the subject of Rahman and Abigail's book. From mass shootings by white supremacists in Norway, Christchurch, and Buffalo, to school shooters from Columbine to Sandy Hook, the perpetrators were not psychotic. They were propelled by powerful beliefs, shared, amplified in their subcultures, and reinforced until those beliefs consumed their whole being. And those deadly contagions are twofold. Not only do the beliefs spread, but the acts themselves become templates. Every shooting inspires the next. Every manifesto and every headline fuels another young man to commit mass murder. And now, tragically relevant, we appear to be witnessing the birth of another frightening contagion born out of extreme overvalued beliefs. The targeted assassin, where the young violent male fixates on a single symbolic enemy. So just as these violent actions are fueled by overvalued beliefs, so too is the trans phenomenon, very different in expression, but identical in structure. In the case of this contagion, the overvalued belief is that trans is natural, healthy, and that trans is a whole new way to be a person. Think about it. These kids aren't identifying as having a poorly defined psychiatric disorder called gender dysphoria. They're certainly not identifying as having a paraphilia. They're identifying as trans, a reified identity that is now celebrated as a brave new way to be a person. Once young people collide with this dangerous belief, loose in our culture, they plunge themselves into the worlds of TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram, endless feeds that glorify and amplify the belief until it consumes them. The idea is simple, emotionally charged, highly transmissible, and very, very alluring. Your suffering has a single cause, you are trans, and your salvation lies in medical body modification. All the way back in 1892, Wernicke observed that these beliefs don't start out as all-consuming. They become overvalued in incremental steps, and they can only take hold when no countervailing perspectives are present in a person's life. More than a century later, we see exactly what he described, but Wernicke could never have imagined the hermetically sealed digital echo chambers of the internet, where no corrective forces can penetrate. The result is chillingly predictable: exposure to extreme ideas, reinforcement by those in the culture or subculture, and then action. For some, the action is violence against others. For others, it is violence against their own bodies, castration, mastectomy, or phalloplasty. Like violence, the trans contagion is also twofold. Not only does the belief that trans is natural and healthy spread, but so too does its medical embodiment. Every celebrity showered with adoration for coming out as trans, every student applauded by teachers and peers, becomes a template that draws in more vulnerable young people who then absorb the belief, become all consumed by it, and then pursue radical permanent disfigurement in its name. Because this is the key difference. Society recognizes the beliefs that lead to murder as dangerous and pathological. But when the overvalued belief is, I am trans, society does the opposite. Governments enshrine it in law, doctors pick up their syringes and scalpels, the media romanticizes it, and schools don't just celebrate it, they teach it as if it's scientific fact. And anyone who suggests the belief is harmful is swiftly punished. Again, the madness lies in society. As the famous saying goes, history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. The parable I opened with comes from the book Try to Remember by Dr. Paul McHugh, which is an account of his battle the last time large swathes of society fell under the spell of a dangerous, overvalued belief unleashed by a political movement. Then it was the belief in repressed memories, the idea that a person could endure years of the most horrific child sex abuse, but have no memory of it until they found themselves in the care of an expert in recovered memory therapy. McHugh tells of pulling 3 desperate men out of the river, loving fathers and uncles, who suddenly found themselves accused of the most heinous crimes against female relatives who were caught up in the madness. After the 3rd, McHugh realized he had to go upstream. What he found was a gang of psychiatrists consumed by this overvalued belief, whose actions resulted in hundreds of thousands of false allegations of child sex abuse, normally against loving parents or family members. These allegations fell like a bomb on households, obliterating loving relationships, shattering reputations, and destroying lives. It's hard to believe that we didn't learn from this catastrophe, but here we are again, just a few decades later, in the exact same place. Only now the belief hasn't just captured psychiatry, but endocrinology and surgery as well. Whole branches of medicine have fallen under its spell, and that's what makes this so dangerous. It's not only the patients who are consumed by the belief, it is the doctors too. WPATH is their insulated echo chamber where no counteracting views or opposing ideas can penetrate. So they march forward, injecting hormones, chopping off healthy body parts, true believers in the fantasy that the 21st century has unveiled an entirely new kind of human. And the pathology spreads beyond the clinic. Parents who tell their effeminate boys that they are girls, teachers who secretly transition children behind parents' backs, politicians who zealously pass laws to ensure the scandal continues, all acting pathologically, all in the service of the same belief. Once again, the madness lies in society. Which is why today, Genspect has officially launched its re-psychopathologization campaign. And it's re-psychopathologization through the lens of the extreme overvalued belief, not to stigmatize, not to marginalize, but to restore clarity and compassion, because this is a pathological condition, an all-consuming fixation that demands careful psychiatric intervention. Whether the trans-identified person is an autogynephilic man, a gender non-conforming homosexual, or an autistic adolescent muddling through puberty, if they have come to the conclusion that their trans identity is healthy and it is their body that needs to be fixed, that is the wrong conclusion. What they need is not hormones and surgeries, but compassionate, appropriate, and ethical psychotherapeutic support to help them recognize that the belief itself is pathological. The 2010 declaration by WPATH to de-psychopathologize gender variance was not based on scientific discovery, but on political advocacy, and it unleashed catastrophic harm by framing ethical psychotherapy as conversion therapy and igniting a social contagion. But it wouldn't be accurate to say that WPATH's campaign failed. One of the main goals of de-psychopathologization was to secure full unfettered access to hormones and surgeries for anyone who demanded it. So in that sense, it was actually a roaring success. But time's up, WPATH. 15 years of harm is 15 years too many. Genspect's call for re-psychopathologization is not motivated by politics. It is motivated by truth and by respect for the Hippocratic Oath, and by the duty to protect children, adolescents, and vulnerable adults from being consumed by this dangerous belief. Yet, re-psychopathologization must be grounded in compassion, recognizing that the young people caught up in this are innocent victims who, in a state of extreme vulnerability, were thrown into the powerful current. These victims had the misfortune of coming of age in an era of collective madness, when safeguarding was abandoned on the altar of politics and medical body modification was sold as a cure for adolescent angst. They are blameless, and many are afraid. They deserve care and understanding, but above all, they deserve the truth. So Genspect calls upon governments, medical associations, and psychiatric bodies to abandon WPATH, to reject the ideological incoherence of de-psychopathologization, and restore safeguarding by recognizing the pathological belief that drives transgender identities. Before I close, I must speak to all who play a role in shaping our culture: journalists, activists, educators, politicians, and every public figure taking part in this debate. First, to a certain cohort of journalists, understand the weight of your influence. Put a trans celebrity on the cover of a magazine, glorify a trans identity, and you strengthen this dangerous belief. Repeat activist misinformation, such as gender-affirming care is life-saving, or smear those trying to protect children as anti-trans, and you fortify the overvalued belief that salvation lies in irreversible medical interventions. But my plea goes further. To activists who spread this belief, to teachers who pass it on to children, to politicians who enshrined it in law without even understanding it, you are all complicit in sustaining the harmful belief driving this scandal. By oversimplifying complex issues for votes or clicks, stripping away nuance and reducing everything to us versus them, trans allies versus transphobes, the virtuous left versus the fascist far right, opposing viewpoints are demonized, resulting in those essential countervailing perspectives being shut out. This creates the perfect conditions for dangerous overvalued beliefs to become all-consuming. Remember this, people act differently on these beliefs, they act in different ways, but the pattern is the same. One engraves political slogans on his bullets. The other has a surgeon engrave customized mastectomy scars on her body. Those of us in the public sphere must recognize the power that we hold. We can either fan the flames of these dangerous beliefs, or we can help extinguish them. Choose carefully. Now, I know some people think this monster is too powerful and it can't be beaten, so therefore the fight is not worth waging. But let's remember how all this began. Back in the 1980s, a small group of trans activists hatched a plot to take an absurd ideological, overvalued belief that being transgender is innate, natural, and healthy, and force all of society to live in a fictional world built upon it. Given the sheer audacity of that plot, I find it hard to believe that there weren't voices of doubt, naysayers in the room who said it couldn't be done. But if such voices existed, they were ignored, and the activists pressed on until they succeeded in nothing less than reshaping reality itself. And they didn't just persuade people to politely look the other way. They rallied good, decent people to march in the streets, demanding that teenagers sacrifice their health, fertility, and sexual function in the name of this belief. They convinced governments to write laws based on a non-existent fictional concept. They enlisted well-meaning teachers to poison the minds of a generation with absurd lies. And they drove doctors to amputate healthy organs and call it medicine. If they could succeed in creating that false reality, then surely we can succeed in restoring truth. Because our cause is not built on lies, but on logic and reason. Not on ideology, but on sound ethical principles. Not on harm, but on healing. And so we return to the parable. We cannot stay downstream forever, pulling injured bodies from the current while the monster wreaks havoc upstream. We must confront it head on, because this belief is too dangerous and too destructive to be left standing. We simply have no choice but to defeat it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.